Yes, welcome back to the Magic Sponge podcast, the miracle cure for all your rugby league injury issues. I'm Brien. I'm the guy behind NRL Physio and all the stuff you see on social media. We are back for our first off-season podcast. Season is done and dusted. My co-host, Physio, Big Footy Nuffy, James. Mate, you're in. It's the off-season. Look, since we last spoke, the Bronx lost the final. The Kangaroos lost the Pacific Championships. You've had to sit there and
lost as well.
Gillaroos lost. You've had to sit there and watch Herbie Farnworth, Tom Flegler win their Dolphins kits. Like, how you going, mate? I'm doing a welfare check at the moment.
Mate, it hasn't been a lot of good times for yours truly on the sporting front. I'm sort of putting all my eggs into the cricket basket at the moment, getting them into the World Cup. So hopefully they sort of fire up and get a few more wins. But very disappointing as a Broncos fan. Obviously, epic game of footy. Sad for us, especially because I really got my hopes up for a lot of that game. So to get it done at the end with Nathan Cleary there was disappointing. And then obviously the Australian men and women's team was a bit disappointing as well to round off the season. Brian, how have you been going in the off-season though? Obviously getting a few things.
Yeah, mate. A bit more time on my hands, which is always good. Not as much stuff to keep on top of. Busy at work, which is always fun that time of year. Got a few holidays coming up the beach with the kids, which will just be parenting at a different location, I think, but still some good time off work. Good to catch up with yourself last night for a few beers, which is always long overdue, and got a few more opportunities to catch up with yourself and a few mates over the, heading into Christmas. It's a good time of year, as much as footy's over. We got cricket coming in, which is always good. We're both big cricket lovers. Hopefully not too many injuries for us to analyse there. And the NFL's in full swing, which, makes Monday mornings all that easier to get up and head to work because we can watch that. But yeah, look, let's get into it. I mean, this should be hopefully a pretty quick one. We've got a few big topics to talk about, but guys, if you've been listening to us throughout the season, what we talk about, we're going to keep it pretty, cut and dried today. We'll go straight into talking about some injuries from anything that's happened since the grand final. And then we've got a few questions just on some interesting injury situations, mostly in the NFL. But without further ado, let's get into the injuries that have happened since the grand final.
I don't know exactly what he's done. I would have thought it was an ankle, but I'm just guessing. He shouldn't be out for a long period of time. And I'm no doctor. We have to wait for the scans, obviously, but that'd be more positive than negative.
Bit of an injury wrap-up, Brian, to round off the season into the off-season almost. And we're probably just going to name these people sort of one by one and just talk to them more specifically so we can get a bit of dialogue going about them and what your thoughts are about their off-season and what to look out for season 2024. First cab off the rank, the biggest name on the run sheet here tonight is Nathan Cleary. Obviously, he had a brace on his knee for a suspected PCL injury. Obviously, the photo going around on social media was Cleary shirt off, looking the business. Obviously, had Mary Fowler there as well, looking pretty cute. But what caught your eye the most was the PCL brace, interestingly. What do you want to tell us about Nathan Cleary and his PCL, or what your suspicions are around his PCL injury?
Mate, I am a romantic at heart, as you know. Only way I hold on to my wife year after year. But I'm a physio probably first, even before I'm a romantic, and straight onto that knee brace. Look, I'd been keeping an eye out for that because he'd been over at Bali and had a knee brace on over there. And initially, the video of the injury wasn't all that great when it first came out. It was a hip drop tackle from Papenhuyzen that he got charged for, just copped a fine and stuff like that. I think to cover off on that quickly, to those people who are sort of asking why didn't he get more or picked up and all that kind of stuff. I mean, they get missed. We've spoken about that in the past, unfortunately, with the way the tackle is, but also like the damage from this tackle with a PCL injury is that knee into the ground. The knee, Cleary's flex knee going into the ground. So not necessarily a direct kind of, Papenhuyzen has dropped his hips onto the knee and cause the PCL to tear. That's very unlikely. It's just literally Cleary going to ground. His knee is flexed. It goes into the ground. So I don't know whether that's like played a role in the fact that, because they do seem to take the injury into account. I don't know whether anyone at the match review committee would have the the smarts to know that was it. But yeah, that kind of did contribute to me being like, oh, okay, maybe that's why, is because it would have been just the contact with the ground rather than the contact of Papenhuyzen himself. I will say that we haven't had it completely confirmed that it is a PCL injury, because from the video initially I thought it might have been MCL because that's the common one for those hip drops, but there was one report from Sydney Morning Herald that they were suspecting PCL, and the fact he's still in a brace, I mean, look, that could be a high-grade MCL too, theoretically, but I would say more than likely, especially the fact that he was able to play out the game, you're looking at a moderate to high-grade PCL injury. Just makes, like, I'll say that again, like, and I hope that we get the details about just what the nature of the injury is. But for him to do what he did in, like, particularly that last half an hour, but just to play out the whole game with that injury and to perform like he did, like he would have had to gone in at halftime, had that injury cooled down, and that's when it's going to be, painful. It's probably going to swell up a little bit, all that kind of stuff. He doesn't have the adrenaline pumping. And he's got to go back out there, Yo's off, Luai's off, all these things that we know. But to do all that with whatever this injury is, and it sounds like it was a moderate to high-grade PCL injury, is just, it probably won't get the fanfare that like a broken face from Sam Burgess or, fractured shoulder blade from Cooper Cronk did. But I think it probably is most comparable to Burgess for me, in that, like, Burgess obviously still played really well. Like, Cronk was hidden really well in that grand final that he played. But for Cleary to effectively just win that game all on his own and potentially have a high-grade PCL injury is just crazy to me. I don't know, like, before we keep going on about the implications moving forward, how, like, you're a Bronx fan, and obviously that was an absolute dagger. But are you sort of on the same wavelength in terms of, like, I just feel like it's a bit underappreciated at this point in time, just how crazy that effort is.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think he deserves way more plaudits than he's been getting for it, particularly if it is high grade, and I agree with you. I think it's probably more leading to that PCL rather than MCL injury, especially how they taped him, because I was really sort of eagle-eye watching how they're taping him, praying to Jesus that he wouldn't come back on and get the Panthers home. But anyway, he did. And just when I noticed his taping, he had it sort of taped around the joint line itself, like sort of just circumferentially, as opposed to medial sort of MCL type tape. So you sort of think, well, it's probably more likely a PCLE type mechanism there. But I think, to your point, it's an epic effort to play with a injury like that. Consider the last try as well. He injured that early doors too. I think it was in the first 20 minutes from memory, or first 10.
10 minutes, it was
very
minute,
early.
Yeah.
That's right. I remember seeing that early. And you think in that last play of the game, he's stepping off that foot twice to get back under the post, win the game. 3 in a row, see you later, pack your bags, on to Mad Monday for Nathan Cleary, who can do no wrong. So I think when you put all those things together, it's just one of the great all-time grand final performances that hasn't even really factored the PCL injury into that either. That's not even part of the folklore yet. And I hope there is something a little bit documented. I don't think Nathan's going to come out and probably say, too much to it to get more plaudits, because, the bloke's won 3 in a row. Like, you can't really get much better than that. But I think it adds a good contextual layer to what he was probably going through and what he pushes through and what those guys push through in general as well. A lot of those Panthers boys, I'm sure, were carrying fairly significant things. Jerome Luai didn't see out the full game. And Nathan sort of played the full game on that. Pretty amazing effort, hey. I guess back to you about implications. What do you think about implications for him into next season, potentially, if it's high grade? Do you think they'll look at just managing it non-operatively for 2024?
Yeah, I think, just to your point, I think if we don't hear it from Cleary or the coach, like, they're usually pretty quiet about those kind of things. The one person, just as you were saying that, popped in my head, like, is it there? I don't pay attention to footballing departments, but is it, or footballing clubs, but is it their CEO or something, that Brien Fletcher dude, who's like always in the media, like just sounding off about like just absolute rubbish a lot of the time? I feel like he'll come out and like just sing the praises from the rooftops about just how crazy it was. So surely we'll get a good Brien Fletcher, rant about it at some point, because he's always good for that. But I think the interesting thing with PCLs for everyone to know is that even if you completely tear a PCL, you don't, or you rarely need surgery, or they rarely perform surgery, especially in NRL players. So like to get a PCL reconstructed, you're looking at, 6+ months rehab, whereas you put it in a brace, they do some really good rehab with it. And we've seen guys come back as soon as, like, I think Adam Fanua-Blake came back 2 weeks after completely tearing his PCL, but the usual range is kind of 1 to 2 months, and that's even accelerated in season. The big thing, and I would say that's obviously the way they're going to do it. If they were going to do anything surgically, they would have already done it. The thing here, and I will point it out by saying guys like Billy Slater, I think, finished his career without a PCL in either knee. So it doesn't heal, or it rarely heals. So Billy Slater, no PCL in either knee. Andrew Fafita, also no PCL in either knee.
GI as well.
GI, and I was going to bring up GI as like, because this is the consideration, right? And I was, even when I posted about it, I had a really good input from a physio who used to work for the Warriors, and has worked for a few NRL clubs, and like he was sort of saying, and it's definitely the way I feel about it, is that even though your PCL injuries, they don't require surgery and they don't undergo surgery, it's like the performance implications, number one, because longer term, you now don't have that PCL there. So you've got to stay really on top of strengthening rehab, stability rehab, to kind of keep your performance and your like dynamic stability off that knee really good. And there are some guys who struggled with that, like Andrew Fafita, for example, was one who was an absolute worldie, and just like his footwork laid at the line and all that kind of stuff. But it really went downhill sort of later in his career. We see, and I know I see it in a lot of my guys too, is that a lot of you guys who have your PCL injuries but don't have surgery go on to have like meniscus tears and stuff like that, because you all of a sudden don't have that PCL there. So the meniscus is just an increased risk. And someone like GI, I wanted to bring him up because it effectively ended his career early. Like he ended up, I know part of that was mental and GI's mental struggles that he was having with those kind of things, and he had the history of ACL injury and all that kind of stuff, but he had the PCL issue, which eventually just resulted in his knee getting to a point where it was just no good. It was no good. And Fafita's knees, like Fafita was famously said, I could be medically retired at this point. And that was about 18 months before he even actually retired. He was at the point where he's like, I could theoretically be medically retired right now because of the state of my knee. And I'm like, yeah, so that's probably the biggest thing for me with Cleary, is that the PCL, while we've said, it's such a fantastic effort and I can't believe he did it, but also on the other hand, it doesn't need surgery. He can just rehab it and all that kind of stuff. It does give me some, at least a 5 to 10% more mid to long-term concerns about him, just because of the implications we've seen with PCLs in the past. I'm not sitting here saying he's going to, be forced into early retirement or anything like that. But we've seen guys like your GIs, later in their career, like GI really, he didn't fall off a cliff, but he definitely came back to the pack in terms of his mobility and his way around that. So whether Cleary, later in his career has to go down that SJ path of, becoming a less of a runner for a bit, or, his knee might give him troubles or something like that. It's just something to keep an eye on anyway. And I think it's an interesting point for people to consider moving forward.
Yeah, like that as a summary, Brian. I don't think there's anything else I wanted to add on Nathan Cleary there. So I think what we might do is move forward to another really interesting one. I think this is probably the one I really want to dive deep on, because we're going to talk about Karl Oloapu. So he's obviously at the Bulldogs there, only going 19 in January, and he's sort of been documented in the media as needing neck surgery. So I'll probably flick to you about what that sort of has been specifically, and then we might sort of talk about what that might mean for him and what the implications for that might be, or the indications might be for or against Karl Oloapu there, I reckon.
Yeah, mate. I think this is another story where, being physios, you sat there and, you understand the implications of Cleary doing what he did on a PCL injury, and you can't believe it. I think this, and look, the headlines have said, career-saving surgery and all that kind of stuff. So yes, there has been a bit of, mayo put on on the stories, but I just having the surgery that he is going to have at such a young age, and we don't know the exact surgery, but your options pretty much are fusion, disc replacement. I would be shocked if it's just like a micro discectomy or a laminectomy at the back, or a foraminotomy, which are, sorry, they're all big words, but effectively where they go in and like shave stuff away. That is an option for these kind of things, but that's a more, I guess, a minor as far as spinal surgeries go. And
I guess they're all decompressive in nature, aren't they? That's the goal, is decompressive type surgery.
Yeah. So like, I'd be surprised if it's one of those more minor ones, like the way that they're talking. And I mean, Minicello has been involved, and Minicello famously had fusions in his neck. He's put him onto the same surgeon. So you're thinking like potentially a fusion, like. For someone like this, I can't think of an example myself that I have seen in my practice, nor in the NRL, nor in rugby, AFL. There might be some out there that I don't know of, and I know you're going to give in a second a really good example in the NFL, which I think is really interesting. But just to show that this is a really significant surgery. I think that's the biggest thing. And we've had guys have it. Zeb Taylor has had it, Chance Nickel-Klukstar, Joey Leilua, we've had, and then your Joey Johnses, Anthony Minicello, these kind of guys. So there's been plenty of guys have these significant fusion, disc replacement surgeries over the time in the NRL. But the biggest thing to point out is a lot of those guys are mid-20s at the youngest, or older. So the component which we'll talk about in a second is they're skeletally mature. So they're fused, they've done their growing, their bones aren't gonna move anymore or change too much more, is a big component. But then the other component is that even though a lot of these guys were able to play on after that surgery, so many of them had ongoing effects of the injury. So it was something that their performance was diminished, or they dealt with ongoing neck pain. You had guys like Matt Scott and James Tarmo up at the Cowboys. They had ongoing issues with their necks, those kind of things. So getting such a significant surgery at such a young age, it's a bit unprecedented in the NRL as far as I'm aware, and what I've tracked, particularly over the last 6 or 7 years. And I just think, I think not enough probably has been really made about, because it's just kind of been like, before it was announced he was going to get the surgery, it's like, is he going to be able to have surgery to save his career? And now it's like, oh, he's found a surgeon who's going to give him career-saving surgery. So sweet, like, it's fine. And it's kind of like being decided. And I'm like, this is not as cut and dry as like, oh, he's found a surgeon who will do it. Because by all accounts, I think Gus kind of intimated that they'd had 2 other surgeons. The first 2 opinions were like, no, we're not going to do surgery on someone so young. Like, you either need to retire or you need to give it a rest for a significant period of time. He's obviously already tried rehab side of things because he's been dealing with it since mid-year. So it's not like they're rushing to surgery. They've tried it for a while. And there was also suggestion it's like a congenital thing, so something he's had since birth. But yeah, I just think this is a situation that we're probably, if, somehow we convince our wives to continue to let us do this podcast for the next couple of seasons, I feel like Karl Oloapu is someone we will be talking about a fair bit over the next couple of seasons, just in terms of how he's dealing with it, how his performance is he getting any ongoing symptoms? I would love to think that we'll go the next 2 years and he'll return to play. The average is somewhere in that 3 to 6 month range. They've said mid next year. So I'd love to think he comes back at 6 months and just doesn't have any more problems with it and it's no more considerations. But that would surprise me, I think. You've definitely got a good example there from the NFL and some good insight into it. So far away, mate.
Yeah, I'll fire away with the NFL example to kick off. And I guess this is a very niche example, but the guy I've got sort of just in the back of my head was a guy called Justin Ross, who he was undrafted to the Chiefs a couple of years ago, but initially blew up out of Clemson Uni when they won the national championship against Alabama. And he had a massive game at age 18, I think he was. And anyway, so I think he had 2 really good years, was by all accounts going to be a lock for a top 5 pick. And then he had a contact injury. I think it was just a tackle contact injury running a normal route, scanned his neck, and he had a congenital fusion. So he's got a very unusual diagnosis, which I don't know too much about, to be honest. It's called, what's it called here? It's called Klippel-Feil syndrome. So it's basically a cervical vertebral fusion syndrome, very rare. So it's like an abnormal fusion of 2 or more bones in the neck. So it's very uncommon. And it does sort of put you at high risk for disc issues as well. So whether he had issues from a neurocompressive point of view, or whether it was more of a disc issue where it was a congenital fusion. So what they ended up doing for him was a multi-level fusion. And what he ended up doing, so he was undrafted. He hasn't played a lot, but he has come back and played. But he was obviously a top 5 pick, had this really awful run with surgery and the rehab with it, and then he went undrafted, and now he's not really an enormously, I guess, relevant player. He's sort of on the back end of a roster. And I guess that's one thing that really, really makes me worried for someone like Karl Oloapu, just without knowing a lot of the detail, is we see this spectrum of outcomes with neck fusions as being just vast. They're just enormously variable. I think you made a good point about Joey. Gordon Tallis was another one. But then you go to the other side of the coin and you look at like Chancellor Clockstar, even just very recently, he's absolutely carving up for the Kiwis in the test match against Australia just recently. So he's doing really, really well in the short term, of course. We're not sort of looking too far ahead with that. But I think just the range of outcomes that can happen from something like this is really profound. And I wonder about the information. I guess we were talking about it. I don't know the implications or indications for this for neck fusion surgery, whether you need to be skeletally mature or not, especially because we were sort of talking about, well, with scoliosis, they tend to like to do them for the thoracic spine when they're not at skeletal maturity because it's too hard to correct it once they're skeletally mature. So I don't know with Karl Oloapu being, just turning 19 in January, what options are there for him, what that sort of looks like mid-long term, what sort of impacts that's going to have on him, mentally and physically moving forward, just with that in the back of his mind, I suppose, as well. Because he was really, really good in the few chances he had this year in a really badly beaten Bulldogs team, just physical, skillful. Like some of the touches he had this year were unbelievable. And as a Queensland fan, really want to see the best out of him because of how highly he was touted coming through the ranks. So I guess a lot of sort of unknown from that point of view, but I guess we do have a few examples of people that have been there and done that with it, with a congenital issue, or maybe it is a more a neurocompressive issue. It's hard to really know, Brian. We don't have a lot of that detail, unfortunately, but I think when I see someone who's age 19 potentially having a multi-level fusion with or without a depression, as a physio who is in a persistent pain clinic, I guess the people that I see are always the ones who don't do well. So I get a bit of a slanted sort of population that come through the clinic that I go through, and far out we see a lot of people that have, persisting pain post-spinal surgery, whether it's lumbar spine, thoracic spine, neck. Again, I get a loaded population, so I'm not saying that's the outcome with everyone, and I'm not ragging surgeons about that, but it is one of those things that does make me a little bit apprehensive to sort of hear that may or may not be what he's facing moving forward. So from my point of view, I hope he is in good hands, and he's had, a few opinions on it. He's been talking to the right people, and he makes a really good informed decision, and, whatever he chooses to do, he just gets on with it and rehabs the house down either which way.
Yeah, and I think that's the key for me, is that it obviously, especially Minicello, has had a good result with this particular surgeon, and this surgeon is confident that he's able to, do something really well for Oloapu. And I've got no doubt, I still think the odds are overwhelmingly in his favour that his career is going to continue. It's more for me, what does his health look like once he's back playing week in, week out footy for the next, he's 18. So 14 years, 14, 15 years, if he's a worldie and he's as good as we all expect him to be. So yeah, it's a long time to play footy with a fusion. a long time, a fusion or whatever that surgery may be. So hopefully we get a few more surgical details and we can be a bit more, specific about what exactly is going on. I wonder whether they're going to do a disc replacement, like rather than fuse it down, do a disc replacement. And it freaks me out too, to be honest. But it's just like it's going to be fascinating if we hear anything. And I think Oloapu's manager has been in the media quite a bit in terms of like talking about it and stuff like that. So I wonder whether after surgery he'll kind of get in the media and give us, some detail about what's going on. But yeah, definitely something I think we'll be talking a lot more about.
Yeah, I probably just wanted to add one more thing there, Brian. I just remember with disc replacement, it almost scares me a bit more because I just remember Chris McQueen before he went from South to the West Tigers. It didn't end his career, but he was never, ever the same player after that. That's for sure. And I suppose the other thing that people hear a lot when they hear about neck fusion or lumbar spine fusion, a lot of people think that means that your available range of motion is severely diminished. But what's important to keep in mind, this is a nerd chat for those who want to skip along a few seconds, is that even if you have a single or multi-level fusion, you have an amount of redundant movement available that you can compensate with, neck range into flexion and extension and rotation to the point where you nearly have, what you would have had pre-surgery, particularly in people that are young, active and well. You see it a lot with lumbar spines. Like you see some people that have, lumbar spine interbody fusions and their range is actually pretty good. And you look at it and you think, oh, like when I was a, grad physio, I just thought, these people will just move like this and it'll just be like a board. But people have, the spine has a fairly good amount of sort of they say redundant movement available. So it has a bit more there than you normally take it through. And then after you have a fusion, you can actually, cash that in a little bit if you do the right rehab with it. So it's not all doom and gloom if you are sort of staring down the barrel of that and thinking that I'm going to be really debilitated, I'm going to have no range. That's going to be, something that impacts my quality of life. We do see people that have good outcomes with that as well. So I think that's the other side of the coin that's worth keeping in mind, particularly for elite athletes. Anything else for Karl? Sorry, we've sort of gone on about him there for a bit, but he's, to me, just so interesting. We'll move on to Cameron Murray next. So he's battling a bit of, is it knee tendonitis that he's sort of battling on and off there, Brian? Do you think that's going to impact his off-season workload potentially?
No, I'm not overly stressed here. I think that tendonitis is, and tendonitis, I'm sure there's a few physios out there. Anytime I put tendonitis, and I received 2 DMs about this, how dare I call it tendonitis? Yep. I only called it tendonitis because that's what the Kangaroos called it. I'm not about to, as I seem to understand, and a lot of you guys seem to understand, but physios who work in NRL clubs don't seem to understand. I'm not here to correct them or to do anything. So if they call it tendonitis, that's what I'm going to put out there. But issues with tendons like this come on chronically over time. So this is something that is very unlikely to have appeared in the last week. I'd be shocked. It's probably something he's been dealing with for a while, been building up. Guys deal with this kind of stuff all season. So it's something that got bad enough towards the end of a long season that he had to miss a game with it. But I think he's going to have 8 weeks off now, which is the best management. I had a lot of people jumping in my DMs, I've got tendonitis. What is the best, the best management for it? And while I can't answer all of your specific things, I've learned very quickly, unfortunately, they are the type of DM that I really can't answer, is this is my specific situation. Can you tell me what to do? It's just a legal nightmare. But in general, for tendinopathies or overuse issues with tendons, one of the gold standard for treatment is load management. So control load, and that's not complete rest. He'll obviously have a fair bit of rest over the next 6 to 8 weeks. I think it's either a 6 to 8 week break they have to have via the CBA. And then him coming back in the new year, they'll just control his training loads really well. So I don't think it's something that will affect him into next year.
Very good. I don't have too much more to add there for that one because I want to talk more about Charles Nicoll-Klokstad. So we talked about him with his fusion, how good he's going, off the back of that. But then the post that you put up about him playing through a broken rib in that last game of the season for the Kiwis, racking up run meters, post contacts, playing out of his skin, doing that with a broken rib, unbelievable,
mate. Chance is one of my proudest bandwagon things. When he moved to the Raiders and was looking like getting that fullback spot, I had just always been such a big fan of what he did at the Warriors, and I couldn't believe that he wasn't getting a run. And so when he went to the Raiders, I was all aboard. I remember that preseason, especially from a fantasy super coach point of view, I was like, get on him. This guy's a gun. I love what he does. He reminds me of RTS to a degree, that kind of thing. I'm just so, and I make jokes about how did the Raiders let him go, because he's just such a good, and he seems like he'd be such a good guy to have at your club. Just a guy who, once again, a bit like in that Dylan Edwards mold, where he's just a guy who's going to do the tough stuff. He's going to start off your sets well. He's not the flashiest fullback going round. And there are people calling for, Joey Manu to go fullback and all that kind of stuff. But he has these games in him, Chance. And to do that with a broken rib, I really would like to think that it's not Michael Maguire putting Mayo on a rib cartilage injury or something like that, and there actually is a fracture there, because it's just crazy. The broken ribs, we speak about it all the time on this show. Any rib injuries, even if it is a rib cartilage issue or something like that, they're so painful. They are almost the most painful injury a footy player can suffer, because it doesn't just affect you when you get that area hit. It's like every time you twist, every time you breathe, you've got pain there. So for him to do that with a broken rib, no, it's not something that's going to affect him into next year. He's got a good 6 to 8 weeks to let that settle, so he should be fine. But yeah, once again, the response, to be fair, the response to my post about this has been overwhelmingly positive. People have been very, very on board with giving him the props he deserves. So I don't think the coverage has been undersold in that respect. But yeah, just love seeing Chance do what he does. I hope he continues to do it. And I'm really keen to see, now that the Warriors are going to keep AFB, which is good news as well. You got RTS coming in there as well. Yeah, I'm just really keen. I'm really keen to watch the Warriors go around again next year.
Yeah,
awesome.
There's a good vibe around the place, isn't there? And, we say it about every team. It's good when they're going good, but there's something special about the Warriors when they're going good. It's just a different level. I think that needs to be appreciated. And, like we said before the start of this season, they've done so hard through COVID. They really had the worst run through COVID, where they had to live and how they had to do it. So seeing them back at home and killing it is good to see. Good for footy. I'm all about it. And good for Chance as well. He's gone over there and made that an absolute win. So hopefully he just keeps ripping and tearing into next year. Next person on the list here, Brien, is Tyrell Sloan. So he had a syndesmosis surgery. Was that a few weeks ago after Kory knockout? I think he got injured at Kory knockout, didn't he?
Yeah, Kory knockout. So 3 months recovery. He should be sweet heading into January, February kind of training. So not something that will affect him overly in his preseason. So I don't think Dragons fans should be too filthy. I think in terms of an injury Hamaso Tabuai-Fidow suffered the same injury in the World Cup late last year.
That's right, for Samoa he's playing.
Yeah, and came back and played how he played for the Finns from round one, right? So it's not the injury that you don't want to suffer. The return to performance from that's pretty consistent.
Pretty good.
So I think it'll be fine.
On the topic of ankles, we're going to talk about Ryan Papenhuyzen here. Have you heard much of an update there through Paps about how he's tracking after that ankle fracture and surgery, pin and plate?
Yeah, so we've heard that he's starting to wean out of the boot, which it's not a major update at this point in time. I'm sure people will want to hear stuff more when he's getting back to running and doing all that kind of stuff. But I think so far the main update here is that it's sounding like it's business as usual. It's kind of what we expected around that, hopefully that 3 to 4 month recovery kind of range. So he's starting to wean out of the boot. More weight-bearing stuff, working on walking, and then hopefully into some form of running and training early in the new year. So yeah, I'm optimistic on him coming back. We've spoken about in that big podcast that we had sort of around it happening. The implications probably mostly sit around how he's going to rehab the ankle and then have the knee that he had problems with on the same side. How's that rehab process going to go as he starts to ramp things up a little bit there. But yeah, more just to say that it's sounding like things are going as expected.
Yeah, that's really good news for Ryan Papenhuyzen. God, he needs some good luck fall his way for 2024. I'm going to cross fingers and toes and everything that happens. Next on the list here was Cory Harawira-Naera, Brien. So he was ruled out for the majority of the season after suffering seizures. I didn't sort of see too much information. I can't recall exactly. Like, they didn't sort of document exactly why that was, or if they had a sort of underlying medical diagnosis for that, did they, as to why he suffered those things, and then with a return to play in mind with that?
Mate, funny you say that, because I would have said the same thing until I knew we were doing this podcast, and I thought, oh yeah, that's a fair big bit of news. So I typed it in, and I think it was about maybe a couple of months ago, 2 months ago, I found one article where I can't remember if it was someone from the Raiders or it might have been his manager was interviewed. And I'm gonna be really careful here because we're in dangerous territory in terms of like my DMs being filled with anti-vaxxers going mental. But I found this really interesting is that, so effectively what they were saying is the way that he passed out and the seizures that he had were obviously very, very much like brain related, right? Like neuro related. That was the way that he presented. Seizures are a neuro related symptom, all that kind of stuff. So a lot of the checks they were doing were neurological related. When they did further testing, they actually found cardiac issues as well. So I think it was inflammation of the heart tissue. Now people are going to jump in and be like, vaccine, all that kind of stuff. I will put it out there that the risk of those kind of cardiac inflammation also exists to a high degree after having COVID as well. So I'm not sitting here like, you're not going to be able to convince me that it was definitely COVID. You're not going to be able to convince me that it was definitely the COVID vaccine. The risk exists there for that entire situation. It could be something not to do with that at all. And I think the ability of people, analyzing this situation to sit back and not point to one thing. And so many times on this show, we say, like, it's not that one thing. Like it would be very, very hard to sort of point and be like, it was definitely that time when he had COVID, or it was definitely when he had that COVID vaccine. But they were kind of really puzzled. They were like, look, everything that we saw and they still thought it was a neuro-related thing. So something to do with his brain. That was what they were sticking to. But the fact that they found the cardiac stuff, they were really puzzled. Effectively, it was the last update that I could find. It was one article, was the only article I could find on it. So yeah, I just found that really interesting. It's not my area of expertise, obviously. So I'm not going to sit here and try and act like I understand exactly what's going on there. And I mean, the people who are treating him sound like they're not exactly sure what's going on. But the good news is that he has since that article 2 months ago, he has been cleared to return next year. So on that, I would assume that A, any cardiac issues have been cleared, and B, any neurological issues have been cleared. So because I don't think he would be cleared to return if either of those things were hanging over his head.
Yeah, and I think to that point, like, seizures are so multifactorial. Like, there's so many different reasons why someone can suffer seizures, and there's a lot of specific investigations that people need to go through particularly your imaging modalities and your blood work and those type of things. So I think it just would have been a case of just going through all those things from the multiple specialists that I'm sure he's seen and figuring out if there's anything. And sometimes it gets to those point where some symptoms that people experience that can be not as specific or not really lend themselves to a certain diagnosis can just be hard to nut out, can't they? Like, we all know someone who's had, ill health for whatever reason, and they've just had these constellation of symptoms that aren't super specific, and they can't really figure out, if there's an actual underlying sort of working diagnosis, or if it's just more non-specific, and then they just have to sort of take a wait and see until it sort of rears its head. So hopefully for CHN, he's back on the field next year and ripping in for the Raiders. Very last one, Brien. So we're going to talk about Jess Sergis here. Toe injury for the Gillaroos there. Gee, she played good in those international games. Like, she was unbelievable. between her and Isabel Kelly, like it's hard if you're thinking Bundy Mixon next year to go away from either of them in the centre spot, isn't it? Like they are just such guns. What do you know about Jess Sergis and her potential toe injury there?
Once again, I thought this is an interesting case because she suffered a broken toe in the World Cup last year, came home, had surgery to stabilise that fracture, then ended up back in hospital because they thought she had an infection. Maybe she came back and went in, but effectively they thought she had an infection and were treating her with antibiotics and all this kind of stuff. But then she had another scan and it was like fractured again, or they hadn't discovered the fracture in the first place. Effectively, it's just crazy to me that she'd been dealing with it since the World Cup last year. It hasn't really been fixed to the point where she's talking about potentially getting it amputated. It's that bad with her at the moment. So it is her pinky toe. I had a few people ask about balance and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't really affect it. Your pinky toe, if it was your big toe, we'd be having a whole different conversation. But your pinky toe, I was actually chatting to our podiatrist about the other day. He said effectively in those people who lose a pinky toe, what tends to happen is over time, the other 3 toes, so not your big toe, the other 3 toes tend to spread out. Like just naturally, they tend to spread out and kind of take up more space. So you tend to compensate for it fairly well. So yeah, nothing long term to be overly concerned about. But yeah, I just find it, what an effort to play the way that she did this season, having that sort of base of support to go off.
Yeah, really good shout. I don't think there'd be too much else I had there, Brian. I guess for Jess, it doesn't sound like she's going to miss time, but the amputation would be a fairly drastic thing, wouldn't it? I guess Angus Crichton sort of set the bar there for everyone, like to sort of say, well, I got my, get amputated. Like, are you going to get yours cut off? Like, it's like sort of how tough are you? Are you on my 100%. Level? Or are you not on my level? So, yeah, hopefully for Jess, she can keep a hold of her toe. I don't know what that would sort of mean for her long-term aesthetically. It wouldn't be sort of the prettiest thing to sort of look down at every day, I suppose. But you have to sort of do what you have to do as an elite athlete. That just comes with the territory, doesn't it, unfortunately? Other more specific or more general questions, I should say, Brian. We've got a couple here. The first one is around Aaron Rodgers. So it's been well documented that he had an Achilles tear in week 1 of the NFL season there, but there's been a lot of discussion about his Achilles repair and what his sort of rehab protocols look like. Do you want to give us a bit of a rundown on the Aaron Rodgers situation, the type of repair he's had, the type of surgery he's had, and how he's going about his rehab?
Yeah, so for those who don't follow the NFL, just to give you a quick overview, so you know why we're talking about this. So we don't tend to talk about just, random NFL or any other sport injury situations, but this one is particularly interesting, and is definitely the injury that I've had the most like DMs questions about from another sport in my time doing NRL physio stuff. It has been crazy the amount of interest in this because he suffered an Achilles rupture in week 1. It is now week 9, I think, in the NFL. So suffered a rupture. It's of particular importance, because Aaron Rodgers is a huge player. Like he is a QB for the New York Jets, has just transferred there this year, is kind of like their, white knight, hoping that I'm sure Jets fans were hoping he was going to come there and be like their savior. But the other component is he's 39 years old. So he's quite advanced in age. For a QB, like you hear 39 as an NRL fan, you might go, oh my God, like how's he still? But QBs can kind of play to that late 30s, early 40s in some cases. We've seen it with Tom Brady recently, still played to a high level. So it is possible. So he's 39 years old. He's had that Achilles rupture. He's gone and he's had an Achilles repair surgery with what they call a speed bridge. Now, it's not as cutting edge and new as a lot of the American media likes to make out that it was. I saw a lot of articles sort of saying this new fandangled surgical technique. Like, it's been around for years. It's something that is relatively, for those higher level kind of guys, it is really, really common, those higher level athletes. So he's had that speed bridge surgery. And where I think it now, because none of that so far is anything too out of the ordinary, but then you've seen after 2 weeks, he was out of the boot, which is usually a 6-week process. So usually you're in that moon boot for 6 weeks. He was out of the boot after 2 weeks. He's been very public with his rehab, doing a lot of stuff already with some weight bearing things, that kind of stuff. And now has been out on the field pre-game throwing the ball. And people have been losing their collective minds about the fact that he's out there throwing the ball. So I think there's a lot to talk through here. We probably will try not to go too long on it. But effectively, my overall thoughts on it, because people have sort of said, where do you sit on it? Is this superhuman? Is it? So it's a mix. Like he absolutely is doing something right, because even if you just say he is rushing it, to have the mobility and the confidence, the mental confidence to be able to move the way he is, even if I took my most confident Achilles patients that I've had and told them after 2 weeks, you've got to get out of the boot, so many of them would have been so hesitant to do that because it's such a major injury. They're that they feel quite significant pain with it. They're very hesitant with that kind of stuff. And then to be kind of moving around and throwing a ball with some foot movement after 6 weeks, I think it was also something that I was like, many of my patients would not have, even considered doing that, because the point we make about ACLs a lot of the time is, as the physio, you kind of have to hold people back because they feel pretty good after 6 weeks. They're like, yeah, I'm feeling good. And you have to be the physio, be like, I know you feel good, but you need to hold back. Achilles aren't like that a lot of the time. Like, people are still in quite a bit of pain. They don't have strength in the area. It's quite tight. It can be sore, all that kind of stuff.
Swelling as well.
That's right.
Yeah, make it swollen for a long time.
100%. So very rarely are you there in those early stages, like after 4-6 weeks, trying to hold people back, because the early recovery from an Achilles repair isn't all that accelerated. It doesn't feel all that good. So there's that component to it, is that there is definitely parts of this that I'm like, whatever he is doing is fantastic. But there's also the other few components. I think, he's definitely he's not doing it purposely, but what he has done so far is making people think that he is a lot better than he is. And so the perfect example is that throw that he did at 6 weeks, where he kind of jogged or shuffled back a little bit and then shuffled forward. It's tear to his, so he's out of the boot. He will have a plastic insert in that shoe that comes up his leg. So he's wearing tracksuit pants every time. That plastic insert, will hold his left foot in a position of comfort for the Achilles and make sure that it does not move. So it's not, even though he's out of the boot, he's still got something in that shoe that means that the pressure going through that Achilles is minimal to none, right? It's very, very minimal. So you have that component, which, not a lot of people have seen that. But then also, even when he was throwing that ball, he's mostly just pushing off his right foot. His right foot is doing all the work, especially as a right-handed QB. That's the foot that you're going to push off. And I think we've seen, like, Kirk Cousins, he suffered his Achilles injury recently on his right. That is so much harder to come back from and to accelerate as a right-handed QB, because you are dropping back on that right foot, pushing through that foot. That is the one that will have a lot of pressure on it. So the fact that it's his left foot in that video where he's throwing is basically not doing much at all. So even though it looks fantastic, and as I said, it's a testament to him that he has the confidence to be able to move as smoothly as he does, his left foot is still not doing much, and nor should it be at 6 weeks, nor should it be. And then the other component of it, and they've spoken about, when can he come back and all that kind of stuff. We've spoken about how these situations happen. He's doing it with an increased risk of injury. There's no two ways about that. The healing things, and I should have mentioned at the start, for those who don't know about Rodgers, he's got that reputation of like a free thinker. He's anti-vax, anti-medicine to a degree with certain things. I think that he's made jokes or sort of talked about listening to like dolphin mating calls as part of his process or recovery. He does like dark therapy, psychogenics, and all this kind of stuff. So he's a bit left field with all that kind of stuff, but there are still there's healing times, right? There's healing times to these things. So he is absolutely doing it with an increased risk, not only of re-rupture, and that is a risk, but also, and probably the biggest concern for me and what I've looked, because I've had 2 patients who've accelerated and been out of the boot at 2 weeks with this injury. So I have seen it happen, both of them. And look, you can use this to shit on me as a physio if you want. Both of them had horrible outcomes. They were both athletes, and they found a surgeon who was happy to accelerate them and get them out of a boot in 2 weeks and kind of really push it through. And both of them didn't re-rupture, but they both had, effectively, they healed with loose Achilles. Like their Achilles, because they pushed it too soon, too quickly, that Achilles, it wasn't completely healed. So when it healed stretched. And such an important part of that Achilles is that power when you're pushing off. So they just lost a little bit of that. And I mean, I'll talk in a minute, because I want to throw to you. I'll talk in a minute about what I think about his return to play. But I know on that point, I think you've got a really good point about, sort of how it is managed conservatively and how important it is to not have that Achilles heal in a loose way.
Yeah, so I guess the anecdotes that I've spoken to quite a few clinicians about over the years, because I guess in Queensland Health and public health, we see a lot more non-operative Achilles ruptures than operative ones. It's very uncommon for us to see actual Achilles repairs, to be fair. Like, we would see Fowler Kennedy protocol requested for most of the people that we see. And the biggest thing that people say is you don't want to take them out of like that sort of plantar grade position in the moon boot too quickly to get them in a long and loose position rather than a short and tight position. So that's the sort of vernacular or terminology that you can use in a nerd setting from a physio point of view, that if you want a better outcome for someone, generally speaking, for that force reduction and force translation, you want to heal them sort of more shorter and tighter. So it does mean they don't necessarily have as much active dorsiflexion range for a little bit longer. But from a tendon integrity point of view, that's actually a more beneficial place to heal, rather than having really good dorsiflexion range, but then being long and loose, to use those type of terms for the Achilles. So that's sort of the way we sort of go about it. So to your point, it's really nice to lay that out to the individual in front of you who's having, rehab for a non-operative Achilles protocol, to say to them, look, it will feel tight, it will feel stiff. That's actually better for you than it feeling, maybe less painful, but a little bit more loose with a better sort of, knee to wall range or active dorsiflexion range or something like that. So that's the sort of terminology that I'm a little bit more familiar with. So I don't know if anyone else listening subscribes to the same sort of thinking, but that sort of touches on your point as well, and sort of just gives credence to the way you've described it there, with the people that sort of try to get out of the boot quicker, or they get their range going quicker. Not always going to give you the best outcome from a force production point of view, from a sprinting point of view, from a resistance point of view as well.
Yeah, so I think then the big question is, when can he come back? He's obviously angling towards a return this season. I think for him to come back and have any sort of impact, he'd have to come back at around 3.5, 4 months post-surgery. People have said, is that even possible? Like, surely not, all that kind of stuff. I guess the big ones I want to look at is we had, it's pretty, not pretty standard, that's a lie, but we've seen guys consistently come back to NRL football. So these are guys like Darius Boyd, Karl Lawton, these kind of guys have come back and played good level NRL football at 5 months post-surgery. So that has occurred. And in the NRL, all respect to Aaron Rodgers and what he does on the NFL gridiron, he is not putting the pressure through his Achilles that a Darius Boyd or a Karl Lawton will be when they go back out there and play rugby league, because they are involved in tackles. They are, sprinting. Theoretically, Rodgers can come back and try and limit himself to be a real pocket passer, which, he might need to take off every now and then, but he's not going into contact all that often, pushing through contacts, having to drive through that. So we've had that at 5 months. We've also had guys like the Russian gymnast. I want to say his first name's Artur, I think, Artur. And he came back in 3 months to gymnastics with he wasn't doing dismounts, so he wasn't jumping and landing, but then he was back to doing that by the Olympics at 4 months, I think. So effectively where I go with this, it is absolutely possible for him to come back at 3.5 to 4 months. Is it without risk? Hell no. Is it something where you would expect him to be at good performance levels off that leg? Hell no. Can a right-handed QB with a left Achilles that isn't at 100% still do pretty well? Absolutely, because as we've just spoken about, it's his lead leg. It's not his back leg, so he doesn't have to push off it as much. It's only if the pocket collapse and he needed to take off that he might need to really rely on it. But I think at 39 years old, the Jets, look, I'd love to think that I might have to eat my words here, but the Jets aren't going to win the Super Bowl. I don't think. I just don't see that happening. He signed you might be able to correct me here, a 3-year deal. So he's got this year and 2 more years, I think. So he's still got time to be influential for them, unless they really, really improve, and they're going to play tomorrow. So by the time this comes out, I might, look a little bit more stupid because they have a big win, when they play. But yeah, I just think it absolutely is possible. And anybody who says it's not possible, I think all these things are possible. It's just the level of risk and the level of performance that you want to come back at. Like, the level of risk is going to be high for a re-rupture, and the level of performance isn't going to be anywhere as good as he would want it to be, because you just cannot. It doesn't matter to me how many, psychedelic treatments he has found that are, rewriting the laws of whatever he wants to rewrite. There are tissue healing properties that, unless you're, without getting a lawsuit, using certain performance enhancing things to make that happen, there are healing, times to these things that will, they're just there, and human bodies don't vary that much on these kind of things. So I think it's absolutely possible. Will he come back? I would be surprised, purely because of that risk versus reward. We talk about risk versus reward on here all the time. I think if you looked at it and you went, yeah, the Jets are, like if it was Nathan Cleary and he was the quarterback for the Penrith Panthers who hadn't won a comp in 40 years, and they really, really needed him. He was the last piece they needed to win the comp. You could see it, and it's the same with Rodgers. If that was the case, I'd kind of wouldn't be surprised. But at 39, with a team that's probably not going to win the Super Bowl with a less than 100% Aaron Rodgers, I just would be surprised if they risk it, especially considering he's got 2 years left on his contract. I mean, where do you sit on it? You're probably the bigger NFL fan than me, so you might have a few more insights in that kind of stuff.
It's a really good discussion point. I almost lean towards him playing, just depending on where the Jets' record is. I think the record dictate what he does. They're 4-3 at the moment with the game in hand. So say if it's week 16, they're 8-8. They're in a wild card spot. I tend to think he'll play. I think he'll be like, if I'm in a playoff sniff, because the AFC is pretty wide open. Like, you look at the two better teams there, it's really Baltimore that's really jumping out there, because Kansas City probably aren't quite as well. They're still a 7-win team, but like Kansas City are thereabouts. The Bengals are sniffing around. The Jags are sniffing around. But the Jets are second best defensively in the NFL, but they're the second worst offensively in the NFL. So you sort of think, if Rodgers just gives this team 21 points, if he throws for 3, or even if he can throw 2 in with a really good running game, with really good solid defense, they could be in the hunt. But again, you got to have a lot of things go your way, and I think they need to be alive for him to do that. My scenario is they're alive. He plays. If he re-ruptures, he just goes, well, I've got that much time until the next season anyway. I'll just rehab it till next season. And if he gets through that game but they don't win, he goes, well, I gave it a crack. He's not going to have that many chances at his age and at his point in his career anyway, with the amount of salary cap he's going to be consuming. You got to make a decision of like, well, how good is this team at the moment this year? And the Jets are a pretty bloody good team, albeit they just have nothing at quarterback behind him, which is always the way. That's just the way teams are constructed. That's the salary cap at play. I would lean to him more playing because I think the Jets will be thereabouts. The AFC is pretty wide open. Like there's not a lot of teams that are really separating themselves, and they're in a division with Miami and the Bills, who will probably take wins off each other. So I don't think you'll see a team that's like a 12 or 13 win team. I think you'll see a lot of those teams be like at that 9-10 marks. If they're sort of 8 or 9 wins, I think you'll see Aaron Rodgers on the field this year. That'll be my big prediction, my Nostradamus prediction from that point of view, mate.
Yeah, so I think for me, as I said, you're definitely much more the bigger NFL expert than me. So maybe I've just got the past Jets in my head as to being trash. So I just kind of go off that. But from my perspective, I think medically there is absolutely a good scenario, like a good chance that he can come back this season, and it would be unprecedented for the NFL, but it wouldn't be unprecedented based on what has happened in other sports and what is happening currently in the management of Achilles injury. So it's not out of the realms of possibility in that respect. I think it's more just accepting that he is able to come back because he is taking more risk for re-injury and likely to diminish performance. And interestingly, I think it's a really good time to record this podcast because the guy who owns the quickest return to play time for an Achilles injury in the NFL is Cam Akers, who came back a couple of seasons ago in 5 months, I think, or four and a half months. So he holds the record, came back as a running back. He looked okay when he first came back, but his yards per carry still wasn't great. But never really got back to the worldy running back that he was before that. And then today he ruptured his other Achilles.
Did he really?
He did, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So today he ruptured his other Achilles. So he's and I think I saw some stats somewhere where it's like there's never been an NFL running back come back after rupturing both Achilles. So it was potentially career over for him. So it just shows you, and once again, you talk about that risk, like for Akers, he's a young guy. Rodgers has only got a couple of seasons left in him likely anyway. So, but yeah, there's a really interesting case, and it just shows you, by all means, Akers had played a couple of seasons before rupturing the other one, but he hadn't performed all that well. Like his performance compared to pre-surgery was not, and the demands of running back are different to QB. And there's a whole, it's so multifactorial. But yeah, I just think, it wouldn't be out of the realms of possibility for him to come back. And I would be shocked if he comes back and plays. I just think you need to accept that a big component of why these guys do it isn't because they've discovered some new treatment that is just halving recovery times. There is absolutely a component where he has access to so much that your regular athletes don't have access to, and that can add little percentages here and there, but it's such a big percentage of why they can come back earlier is just taking more risk.
Yep. Really nicely put there. That's a good way to end that topic on Aaron Rodgers. On the NFL bandwagon again, Brian, second question is about the AstroTurf argument versus natural turf. There's a lot of discussion on should teams be playing on Astro, should they be playing on natural turf? There's a huge voice amongst the players saying playing on AstroTurf leads to higher injury rates. A lot of athletes there prefer to play on natural grass and natural turf. What are your thoughts and opinions on like the AstroTurf or synthetic turf versus natural turf that's happening at the moment in NFL? It seems to bob up and down every now and then, doesn't it? It's almost an annual thing. It's almost like akin to the Suncorp surface. So we used to have that sort of like the discussion about Suncorp Stadium, how it looked sort of once a year, seemingly forever and ever and ever for as long as rugby league's been alive.
Yeah, so I'm a well-documented turf hater. I just don't like it. I think where analysis goes astray is like looking at Aaron Rodgers, who tore his Achilles on turf, and going, see, turf is really bad, because inevitably 2 weeks later, I think, or even that week, J.K. Dobbins tore his Achilles on grass. So it's like blaming one thing on, it's never going to work. Like, not every Achilles tear this season is going to be on turf and that kind of thing. But yeah, it's been the evidence that I've seen that there is evidence that, unfortunately, in these kind of research problems, I could sit on either side of this argument and present half a dozen studies that support me really, really well. But the strongest studies that I've seen have indicated that turf and surfaces that increase the friction coefficient, I think, if I'm going right in the physics, but effectively anything that allows you to have really good grip on surface has an increased risk of injury for lower limb things like ACLs, ankle sprains, because how many times in the NRL and the NFL, for that matter, NFL fans, do we see the problem being somebody's foot getting stuck in the turf and then the tackle continuing while their foot is stuck? That is a big problem. And we just see it time and time again. Turf is just not forgiving. It jars up through the leg. It sends those forces. It doesn't have the give that turf does. I've got an article that is free for anyone to read on Patreon about why, the softer, when, turf, even natural grass, when natural grass is a bit softer and had a bit of rain, it's actually preventative for major injuries like ACL injuries because it's soft. It's got a bit of give to it. And that's, I think, the argument against turf is it's just so unforgiving. It's so hard. Your performance is fantastic on it because you can change direction on a dime.
Speed,
yeah, fantastic for performance. But the higher, the faster you can change direction, the higher those ground reaction forces are going up through your legs. Something's got to absorb that, and it's your ligaments, your tendons, these kind of things. So, and then you've got the grazers, I think, which is like a whole other component.
Yeah, like the burns, yeah.
Oh, mate, it's just crazy. So, yeah, I just think I'm glad it's not an Australian thing. Thankfully, we've got a climate where we can kind of control it pretty well. My argument is, and if you haven't watched it yet, go and watch. I'm sure a lot of people have watched the Travis Kelce, Jason Kelce podcast because they're big Swifties and now they're regular listeners of that podcast. But if you haven't yet, go and watch the rant that Jason Kelce has about it, because he pretty much, like, I could not have said it better myself. He effectively says, we know there are stadiums out there now, and there's one in the US, I'm not sure which one it is, where they literally have the grass on a big rolling, platform.
Yeah, that's Arizona, and I think Vegas as well. Yeah,
and they roll it out into the car park, get it some good sun, and then I think there's one over in, it might be Barcelona or Man City or one of those in a poor climate
where
they
grow it
underground.
Drops,
it drops down, and they've got UV and all that kind of stuff. Like, these guys have the money to do that. Like, the stadium owners or the team owners or whoever it is, they have the money to do that. So just do that. Just do it. I think until the technology improves in turf, I just struggle to see the argument. If you've got the money, if you don't have the money, and a lot of people, I put up a tweet a while back about, not liking turf. And I had a few people from the UK be like, look, it's like, we can't afford grass. Like, we can't afford to have someone, because the climate's no good. We can't afford it. And I'm like, in that kind of scenario, if you're like a suburban club or something like that, and you can afford to put turf down, then you don't have to worry about it. Fair enough, because you otherwise you're dealing with a dirt patch, right? And I get that. This is more talking in professional leagues where the money is almost endless. I just think it should be gone. I'm sure you're pretty same.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I totally agree with your points. When I went to the States in 2016, we did a tour at Denver Broncos Stadium at Mile High. So obviously Denver gets, snowing conditions a lot of the, winter time there. It gets very, very cold. What they have is they have natural grass, but they have undergrass heating. So they have like some infrastructure built into the stadium where they can heat underneath the grass to keep the ground temperature at a certain temperature for grass to grow. So they play on natural turf. We went to the stadium, did the stadium tour, then went on the field. It is so nice, mate. Like, this thing is like a lawn bowl green. It is phenomenal. And this was, and they're like, it's like this all year round. We know what we need to do. They've got really good infrastructure in place in some of those places. So it is doable. It is achievable, even if you're not in a fantastic climate for some of those, sporting teams like the NFL, where you've got billionaire owners that could probably get into their pockets and do something like that, because the overwhelming feedback from the players' point of view is that they would prefer to play on it. And I can sort of see that point as well. I think it sort of looks like a better option to me, and sounds like for all involved it's a better option, and there's sort of less injury risk as well. So I think that's sort of the wrap up on artificial turf versus natural turf. Brian, any other things you wanted to add there?
No, mate, I think that's it. We'll plans for the pod. I think we might have an interview or two coming out over the off season, which will be exciting. So get a player on or something like that, just sort of talk through some things. But we'll probably try. I mean, I've got a few holidays, and I know you're here and there, but we definitely need to try and have our Golden Sponge Awards pod at some point to run through a few end of season awards, because I've got some crackers. I was doing some thinking about it the other day, and I put a tweet out there about the most influential injury, which I think there's a lot of interesting sort of cases you can make there. But there's some red hot nominations for coaching bedsheet of the year. The most renowned award from last year's ceremony. So yeah, look, I'm excited for that. We'll get that out sometime over the next month. As I said, we'll try and get a player or two on potentially between now and then. And then, yeah, once we get into the new year, ramp up, will be the place to go for any prep for the 2024 Supercoach fantasy seasons. We'll be all over all the injuries and that kind of thing. So, but yeah, guys, we knocked out a good one today. James, good to have you on again on a Monday night. Mate, I'm sure you're preparing and ready to go for the Golden Sponge Awards sometimes over the next few weeks.
Absolutely. I'm going to get my thinking cap on to recap and rehash all the best and worst bits of the NRL season that's been done. The other thing I was thinking, Brian, is we need to have an accountability and integrity session about our Supercoach seasons as well. We really need to renew our early crows from this season just gone, and just provide feedback and obviously accountability, because we're a podcast that has high integrity here. So we want to be accountable for our actions and our hot takes from the start of the year. So we'll probably have to rehash that as well. We'll find time to squeeze that in.
Yeah, I definitely. I think there could even be a Golden Sponge Award for best take and worst take potentially, which would be
we're
good
talking.
to see. Yeah, I like it. All right, guys, that's a wrap for this week. As always, if you like the pod, review, recommend to a friend, get them on board for 2024. We had more listeners. I think we doubled our listeners this year, or more than double, which is crazy. So that was awesome to see. Hopefully we continue, moving up and up. We really appreciate you coming on and listening. As always, guys, up the mighty Redcliffe Dolphins, and Val Tafare running a 1.2 kilometer time trial in 5 minutes today. What a weapon. I couldn't do it in that fast. So good on you, mate. Up the Dolphins.
Suspected broken left fibula.